Hi, I'm Andrew Wallace, and welcome to the We've Got a Problem podcast, where each week we explore inspiring stories of struggle, success, and solutions to prevalent problems and how our guests have turned a problem into an opportunity. This week I'm joined by Kyle Woods, known professionally as KM Woods, a Muay Thai practitioner, fiction author, and literacy evangelist. His new book, A Scourge of Innocence, is out now. Kyle, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Andrew. I appreciate you having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm really excited to get a chance to talk because you've done a lot of things. You're not just an author. You've been a sous chef, pedicab driver. Now you're an author. Walk me through it all. How did you get your start?
Man, well, my parents decided that I should be a pharmacist. So when I got out of high school, I did one semester of pre-med, and I really just didn't like that very much. So then I moved in the creative direction. I went into theater. And in order to pay the bills, being a professional theater person, you get into different jobs. So I was a sous chef at a early morning breakfast spot, so I could work really early in the morning and then get off at like 2, and that would give me enough time to study my lines and then go to rehearsal at night.
Sure.
But sous chefing doesn't pay very well, so then I got into pedicabbing, which was on my nights off, I could go out on the streets of the French Quarter and I could basically like put the number in my head I wanted, and then I would just grind until I got that number. And then so there I could work like 2 or 3 days a week, still do the theater. Around that time, I started doing stand-up comedy too, so I would like pedicab to the gigs. I would do my sets. I would get back on the pedicab. I'd work. Um, yeah, so that was crazy. And then, after doing theater long enough, I really fell in love with storytelling in general, just the creative process of making a story and creating a character arc and then creating, scenarios to put your characters through. So I became a novelist, went the romantic route, moved to New York, wrote a novel, and then met my fiance. So now I live in Texas. And yeah, a guy tried to rip my head off one night randomly. So I was like, oh, well, I should learn some kind of martial art. So I started doing Muay Thai.
Well, so that's, I mean, hey, from necessity becomes the mother of invention. But guy trying to rip your head off as an impetus to finding a new passion is kind of how a lot of these auspicious beginnings are. So talk to me a little bit about Muay Thai, because a lot of people don't know quite what that is. How does that differentiate from other martial arts, things like that?
So Muay Thai is, to put it simply, it's Thai boxing, but it's also coined as the art of 8 limbs. And by 8 limbs, they mean your fists, so traditional boxing or Western style boxing, kicking, so kickboxing, knees and elbows. So all of those weapons are at your disposal when you are fighting Muay Thai. And I guess to differentiate it from MMA, there's no ground and pound. The only type of wrestling there is upright. So if anybody ends up on the ground, the ref is supposed to stop the fight, let the fighters get back up, and then retake their stance to get back at it. Yeah, so no ground and pound. And yeah, I mean that's the gist of it. It sounds simple, but once you're playing that chess game of like not knowing which weapon's coming at you next or which one you should throw next in combination, it's a chess match. It's definitely a chess match.
Yeah, well, for sure, and probably helpful if somebody tries to rip your head off in the future, because at least you've got some skills at your disposal. So,
definitely more than I had, for sure.
Yeah, well, for sure, definitely more than you had. So, I mean, we talked a little bit beforehand and messaged back and forth. You've become kind of a literacy evangelist. You'd read some statistics that literacy had fallen in the United States. We've got a problem with literacy in the U.S. I think, let's see, according to the U.S. Department of Education, an estimated 43 million U.S. adults cannot read, write, or do math above a third grade level. That puts us at about 21% of the population. Now, I want my listeners to understand that statistic may be a little bit high because we have a large immigrant population and that test was conducted in English. However, 66% of low-skilled adults were actually born in the U.S., So clearly we have an issue. Why do you think we have this problem?
I'd say an expedient answer has surpassed the rigor that it would take to find an answer in the old-fashioned way. But the reason the old-fashioned way should still have more value is because in the rigor of finding the answers to the questions you want to answer, you're typically going to answer 12 to 13 more questions in the process. Just the process of like reading a book is so enriching, especially when you're in the practice of doing it daily. I think that's another thing too, is that it's kind of like going to the gym. It's like this hump you have to get over to where you're like, oh, I really don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. But when you get in the practice of doing it regularly, you'll find that you actually need to do it, or a certain piece of yourself will feel that something's missing. At least
Yeah.
that's the way literature worked for me. You know, when I was in high school, I didn't like pick up a book first instinct. I wanted to watch TV. I wanted to play video games, all the things that are fun and they give you that nice, like fast dopamine release right off the bat. But
Yep.
the the slow burn of actually like reading a book and taking it in. And I mean, like when you read, just actually like the way I like to think about it is like this is the thoughts of another human being that are so closely tied to them, but also it's your own brain kind of spark firing at those thoughts. It's a very intimate process, and the magic of that is something that I think really used to be valued. It's something that people very much thought was worth their time, but with the accessibility of information that we have with new technologies, it's just incredibly difficult to put that on the shelf and then kind of go into this very slow, um, rigorous, difficult thing to do. I mean, that the thing is, we have to be honest about reading. It is very difficult. It's a difficult thing to do. It's a difficult thing to do correctly. It has to be practiced, but the benefits of going through that rigor, going through that practice, the rewards it yields are infinite. I mean, it's the
Yeah.
beauty of books, I think.
Yeah. Well, there are a couple of components that I want to highlight in what you just said. Part of it is the fact that there is less of a need to read beyond a certain level. That at a basic, very fundamental level, you can get everything you need and then just watch it as a YouTube video. You don't, if you don't practice these things, you'll never focus on the concentration that's required to actually delve deeply into a subject. And breadth in some ways is the enemy of depth, right? Being aware of and just having a surface level knowledge of so many things. There's also a component of intellectual curiosity and learning to cultivate that, because as people read, and again, as they practice, because none of us was perfect when we started reading. We all had to go through the process of struggling. And now there's a tendency to want to, again, in the interest of expediency, to just get it and go and move on, and to never dive deeply into something that actually might be incredibly fascinating. And we're losing that ability to concentrate. So we talked a little bit, and I try not to dwell too much on the societal aspects on this show, but we've talked a little bit in the past about the fact that some of this just makes sense. And I want to have you expand on that a little bit more. From a societal point of view, low literacy numbers are not really that surprising, right?
No, I don't find them surprising at all. I think if anything, the people who see the problem, it's getting to the point where, people who see the value in reading, I think, even if it's not an obligation, but a responsibility to at least put the problem as something in the forefront of the society's list of ongoing problems. Because, the thing about literacy is that I think it's a problem that if you let it get too big, then it's going to spark numerous other problems. Like,
Yeah.
the thing is I, a sharp-minded society that is well-read and well-versed, that can communicate properly, because reading these are things that reading helps with across the board: vocabulary, communication, depth of ideas, critical thinking skills. As soon as we start losing all of those little things, then you start having a real issue to where truthful ideas and things that will actually solve really heavy problems in the society aren't going to be able to be answered, because you're losing something of a very substantial value, and it's beyond
Yeah.
simple, you know. I'm trying to think of the right way to word it. It goes beyond just being able to read Harry Potter. It's, we have to be able to understand, psychological books, communication books, business books, um, religious text. I mean, religious texts carry a heavy amount of wisdom, and even if you aren't subscribing to those religions, these are things that we have to be able to understand in
Yeah.
order to understand the human condition.
Yes, and to understand your fellow man. I mean, just to understand where somebody else is coming from. When you meet somebody on the street, and I use this as just kind of a metaphor for life, but you meet somebody on the street and they come from a different point of view. And if you aren't able to say, well, that's interesting, I'd like to know more about that, and pick up a book or find their sacred religious text or whatever it is and go, now I understand your background. Now I have a better ability to communicate with you, and you have an ability to understand me if I can share those books, those things that were sacred or important to me as well. Interestingly enough, I did see when I was researching literacy statistics that in a lot of the Arab countries, their literacy rate, their adult literacy rate, is in the high 90 percentile. And ours is 79. I mean, we're talking about beyond fundamental basic literacy, that they have a high degree of literacy in these countries, partially because of the strong religious background that so many of them come from, and how important it is to them as a society to understand their religious texts and to know them and to recite them. Now, there are other things that go along with that we certainly won't get into on this show, but interesting to find how much religion can play a part of this, because the Catholic Church for a long time wanted to discourage reading because they didn't want anybody else to interpret the religious text. They wanted the priests. They wanted the Catholic Church will tell you what the interpretation is of the Bible. You are not to make your own interpretation.
But even that speaks to the importance of being able to read. The fact that there are people who have a definite want to stop people from reading,
Yep.
shows that there's a deep-seated strength and personal value that you will gain from being able to do it well.
Well, it's like you say, it's like a secret weapon. I mean, to be able to unlock all this knowledge that's out there, and I'm kind of surprised, and also not, at the fact that we have more information at our fingertips and we make less and less use of it every day. Like, it's all out there. It's right there. Hey, I feel like the Reading Rainbow commercial, but just take a look. It's in a book.
Right. That's, and I mean, what's great about the expedient tools that are dispersing this information is that you can find the right book immediately. I mean, I don't know if you remember, like, before, I was pretty young when I started reading books, but finding the right book for whatever you were working on used to be a process in itself of, like,
Yep.
going to the library, talking to the librarian about, like, this subject so much, and, like, just hoping that they have some semblance of an idea of what you're working on so that they can point you in the direction of a book that might have the information you're looking for.
Yes. And I very few, I mean, fewer and fewer people, and I think I'm kind of the last of the generation, because computerized card catalogs were coming in when I was in school, right?
Right.
We still had in a lot of libraries, you had to go to the actual card file because not everything had been cataloged yet. So you had to pull out the card and go off some summary, hoping that you'd found the right one, then go find the book, read a little bit of the book to find out if it even said what you were trying to learn about, and then go back and keep doing. So you'd end up just stacking up this pile of books in the library before you found the one that was like, this is kind of what I'm actually trying to figure out.
And then you remember the feeling that you would get when you found that book. Finally, you'd just be like, yes. And then like the work hasn't even started yet, but you're already feeling like a sense of accomplishment because you're like, well, this is definitely the book I need. Yeah. And that's 100% of the battle. That battle's solved for us now. Like, if you're trying to figure out how do I fund a startup? You type into Google books on how to fund a startup, and there's like 6 of them. And then you read 4 or 5 reviews on each book.
Right.
You gauge, I like basically what the idea of each book is, and you're like, well, that's the one. Maybe you order 2 from Amazon for $5 a piece, and they're there in 2 days.
Right. And we've got so much access to it that there is another component that I think about that brings up, which is the fact that the cost, the barrier to entry for publishing a book has gone down substantially. And that is good and bad, right? Because it makes people like you and people like me trying to do a podcast and all these things, we can just put it out there. You can write a book, you can make a podcast, you can do whatever and get it out there. But that also means that there's a lot less vetting that goes on. There's no big publisher standing behind a lot of these books saying that's gone through the editorial process that's said, can we verify the claims that this guy is making or do whatever, especially when it comes to actual real tactical, boy, I'm using the wrong word here, actual education material, because fiction is fiction, right? You write a great story. It's fantastic. It's a news story. Fine. But if you're trying to actually do research and actually learn about a topic, and somebody makes definitive, declarative statements about something, you'd certainly hope that somebody had looked at it and said, well, yeah, actually that we can show that. Not that if I said to you, cigarette smoking is good for your health, that I could back that up. And of course, nobody can. So nobody's making that claim. But in the sense that you could go in that somebody had read it. So that does help. And there was a day back when, times were times, that Random House or whatever publisher would put something through this long process. But of course, that one slowed things way down, way too slow for today's world. And 2 meant that you had to get accepted by somebody and hopefully they would agree with your ideas. And that's a big confirmation bias issue where, we've got, so that's a big mix. But when we look at these things, when we find that book that works for us, and it's like, it used to be like winning a scavenger hunt, and now you just go on and you pick it up and you're done. You've got it.
It's there.
And I do miss the days of actual physical paper books and a library only for feeling like I was a winner because I was able to find that book before somebody else in the class was able to find it and check it out, since they only had one copy and I needed to grab that for my report on the same subject.
Right. You had to fight over books.
Yeah. Hey.
Can you imagine there was a day where people fought over books?
Yeah. Well, that's not happening anymore. So, all right. So go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I would say like in what you're saying about the accessibility of being published now, even that more, kind of harps on the point that the vetting is now done by the individual themselves. It's not going to be done for you by a publishing house. There's a lot more literature being printed and a lot less people reading it.
Yeah.
Well, maybe that's not true. Maybe more people are reading literature, but the point is that if you're going to enter this vastly, internally expansive world of reading books, you have to be able to vet what is good literature and what is not good literature. And that's going to come from reading good literature and reading bad literature.
Right. That comes from the practice again, just the actual repetition of seeing it. Because you can't know till you find it and you're like, that's good. That's,
You're the publishing house now.
Yeah.
The individual. So That's a thing of power, though. That's a good thing, I think.
It is a good thing. No, it's fantastic. It's fantastic. But it's become much more of a buyer beware kind of situation where you do need to start to really use your head because nobody's done it for you. And I think
And
that's
there's a lot
probably
of sharks out there trying
yeah.
to capitalize on, what's popular in the moment.
Yes.
Yeah, just don't get caught up buying those books. And, you can genuinely, you can pretty often tell when you open a book, whether the person's passionate about what they're talking about
Yep.
or if they're trying to make a quick buck. So,
Yeah, there's a thing that I think I think it was YouTube growth strategies or one of those things that somebody said when you watch somebody on YouTube who's trying to grow or make their thing do it and they're giving you advice on what you should be doing to grow on YouTube, look not at what they're telling you to do, but what they're actually doing because there's two very different things of how people act. So in some ways, if somebody's you're reading a book about how to lose weight and how to do whatever, look at what they either actually did or whether they were actually able to do it.
right.
Because hey, that's the action speaks way louder than words. All right, how can we inspire young people to take an interest in reading? What can we do?
I ask myself that question every day. And, I was lucky, that say what you want, whether you like Harry Potter or not, that phenomenon of like the entire world being completely engrossed by a series of books that had a powerful effect on me. So, my aim is to try to replicate that experience for young people at some point. But what I would say is if you are a young person and you're interested in the idea of reading, just know there are books out there that will go to those dark places that you're interested in.
Yeah.
And they are catered towards young people. I say one of the books that inspired A Scourge of Innocence was The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton, because I had a teacher give me that book in fourth grade because she saw that I had an interest in reading, and she's like, I think you would like this book. And she gave me that book. And when I tell you, like, the concept of a book about gang members never crossed my mind, because up until that point, everything we had read had been, sunshine and daisies and, children's literature. And that,
Right.
That has its place in the world as well. But finding a book that will actually kind of expose you to a little bit of adulthood, because
Yep.
ultimately that's what kids want. They want to start feeling like they're gaining their own independence. And if you find that book that is going to a place that makes you feel like an adult,
Yeah.
stick with it. Actually, like, even if it's a little bit above your reading level, kind of try to work your way through it. I'll never forget, like, when I was in like seventh or eighth grade, I tried to work through a Michael Crichton novel. And, like, I didn't really understand what was happening because he's got a lot of, like, scientific
Yep.
terminology and there's a lot of vocabulary I didn't understand. And I'm not going to lie to you and tell you I was sitting there with the dictionary looking it all up. But just the process of trying to work through something that was a little above my pay grade, it gives you that sense of accomplishment.
Yep.
And that's the reward of books. It's not, you're not trying to be smarter than everybody. You're not trying to, you know, show up anybody with reading. And, any high school, bully will show you that. But there is a certain mental and idea worthy accomplishment that comes from actually working through difficult literature and taking that on. It should be something you're proud of. You know what I
Yep.
mean? So explore new ideas, explore scary ideas. I mean, it makes total sense to me why Stephen King is so popular. I mean, he'll go into really dark places and he'll take you with him. And there's like you said, an intellectual curiosity to go
Yeah.
there. And for me, that was what kind of locked me in.
Yes. Yeah. And hey, look, you can have an experience without leaving your living room
Yeah.
that takes you deep into something that you might be totally afraid to go normally physically in reality, but In the power of your mind in the dark corners, you can explore lots of different things and
Yeah,
have a
and
lot of fun.
everybody, you'll discover in your 20s, you're gonna go for everything in the external world, trying to like, you're gonna go for everything out there, and you're gonna realize real quick that like 99% of life is all like here
Yep.
and here. And once you realize that, it's like the world opens up to you entirely. And, books bring you there. Books have the power to bring you there. It's the power of the written word is something that has intimidated people for centuries. It's something that has expanded minds for centuries. It's made people's lives better. I mean, it's made my life better tenfold. So yeah, I'll advocate the rest of my life, even if if something crazy happens, I can't read anymore. If you can read, and if you don't like reading, you should practice it until you do.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and there's also a place. There are people who are slow readers. I'm actually a slower reader, but for other reasons, because I just sit there and contemplate every word as I'm reading it and think about it. And then I admire what they've done to write it because I'm trying to write myself and all those things. But even if you're a slow reader, bringing in audiobooks
Mhm.
as a component of your schedule, because a lot of us have extra time that we're in the car. And of course, if you're in the car, you should be listening to the We've Got a Problem podcast. But otherwise, you might ought to pick up an audiobook to continue on. One of the best functions that I've found lately is, and this is not a paid sponsorship or anything, but that Audible and the Kindle sync up really nicely so that you can be listening to your audiobook in the car, get out, and then pick up your Kindle and continue reading right where you left off. And that's a fantastic function to to give you a chance to continue on. I don't always have a couple of hours to sit around and read a book. But I do have a couple of hours where I'm in the car, driving to the gym, working out at the gym. I've listened to so many fantastic books while I've been working out that working out isn't always the most exciting thing. It's a lot of things over and over and over again. So
So we got to get you in
finding,
a tie.
yeah, hey, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But finding those moments and figuring out how to get back into it, because I think a lot of us have just also gotten out of the habit, and it is a habit of picking up books and exploring those things. And my life has been made tremendously better for it. And by the way, there are people who don't want you to read, so you should pick up a book tomorrow. We're getting to the end here. I have a couple of questions I like to ask everybody now that I've done all my speaking. What is, in your opinion, the biggest fallacy that everybody buys into? It can be very broad, general, or specific to the things that we've talked about. What do you think is horribly overrated?
Comfort, just comfort, being comfortable, wanting to get to a comfortable place. Comfort, safety
Yeah.
are completely overrated in my opinion. And the older I get, the less value I see in it. But it makes sense because the counter to that is constantly facing fear,
Yeah.
which, call me crazy, but I'm starting to find it the result of that is a far more challenging life, a far more rewarding life, and you'll surprise yourself by what you're capable of by
Yes.
pursuing fear instead of comfort.
Yes.
Uh,
And you know what? One of my early guests had a great way of putting it to your point, which was that there's multiple different zones. Say rank them from 1 to 10 for your comfort level with something. And you go, when you're in a 1 to 4, you're in the comfort zone. When you're at like a 5 to 7, you're in the learning zone. And that's a great place to be. Above a 7, 8, 9, 10, you're in the anxiety zone. Let's stay out of the anxiety zone because you're not going to be able to take in new information at all when you're up there. But
well, I think occasionally you got to peek your head in there, though.
yeah, well,
Like,
you gotta keep testing it because it moves. That's the thing, right? As you learn more, you reduce the amount of anxiety that comes with all these things. So
the only reason I say that is because I have my first fight not this upcoming Saturday but next Saturday, and it is anxiety inducing. But being that it's on the schedule, like I can see the day where it's going to happen. I have to at least touch that anxiety a little bit every day so that when that day comes, I'm prepared to take on that level of anxiety.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
so
Well,
it's still
that's,
the learning zone, you know what I mean? But
yes. Yes. It's at the top of the learning zone. That's right where you want to be, right? Because then you're maximizing the effort and energy that you're putting into something. But when you're in the comfort zone, nothing's happening. You're not getting anywhere. You're making zero
stagnant.
progress. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So conversely, what is the most underrated concept you think people overlook? What are people missing? What do we need more of?
Valuing wisdom over monetary gains or material gains. Wisdom is a value that when I see it, I'm very happy to see it, but I don't see it as much as I'd like to see it.
Yeah.
So valuing wisdom and not understanding that there is a constant search for it. Whether you're choosing it or not, wisdom has a way of finding people through life, and if you seek it voluntarily, you'll more than likely gain a lot more of it than if you're just kind of waiting for it to come.
Yeah.
So everybody learns from experience. Everybody's going to have some experience to some level, but actually seeking out those experiences and the wisdom that comes with it, um, it would do everybody a great benefit, I believe.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Kyle, thank you so much for joining us. Folks, if you want to know more about Kyle, you can find him on his website at kmwoodsauthor.com. Check out convictionchampionship.shop, his Muay Thai promotional company. Follow him on Instagram and Twitter. Links to everything are in the show notes as always. And until next time, we don't have a problem. We've got an opportunity.